All right, let's dive into one of the most critical and honestly one of the toughest challenges in any clinical lab: data archiving and retention. We're going to break down the key principles of good clinical laboratory practice by walking through a case study of a fictional lab, we'll call them Apex labs, to see how all these rules play out in the real world.
So picture this. An auditor walks in completely unannounced and asks you to pull up everything, and I mean everything, from a clinical trial you ran 15 years ago. Can you do it? Now, this isn't just some crazy hypothetical. It's a fundamental requirement of GCLP. Apex Labs was ready for that day. Let's find out exactly how they pulled it off.
First things first, let's talk about the why. Why go to all this trouble? Well, at Apex Labs, they understood that holding on to data for decades isn't just good practice, it's an absolute must. The ability to completely reconstruct a trial to prove you did what you said you did years down the road, that is the bedrock of GCLP.
And look at this list. It shows you just how massive the scope is. We're not just talking about the final results. Apex Labs knew they had to save this entire ecosystem of documents. You've got SOPs, training records, maintenance logs. Every single one of these is a piece of the puzzle. It's a link in the chain an auditor will follow to validate your work.
Okay, so let's dig into the first big challenge Apex faced: securing their physical paper archives. And this was way more than just sticking some boxes in a spare room. This was about building a legitimate fortress to protect those priceless records from some very real and very destructive threats.
First up, the obvious one: fire. Apex Labs had to have a solid fire suppression plan. They even used specialized gas-based systems, because the last thing you want is for the sprinklers to destroy the very documents you're trying to save from the fire, right?
And next on the list, water damage. Apex put sensors in place, and they were smart about where they even located their archive, far away from any big water lines. They did everything they could to guard against a burst pipe or a flood, which could be absolutely catastrophic.
And, we can't forget about the smaller threats, the ones that creep in. Apex Labs had a serious pest control program in place, because over a decade or two, things like insects and rodents can quietly turn your essential paper records into dust.
But maybe the most important threat to guard against is human interference. Apex locked their archives down. We're talking strictly controlled, keycard access for only a handful of people, because the integrity of the data relies on knowing exactly who has had access to it.
But what about when the threat comes from the records themselves? This is fascinating. Apex Labs had these critical temperature logs printed on old-school thermal paper, and as you can see, the ink on these vital records was literally fading into thin air, silently erasing a critical piece of the story.
So what was the solution? They had to be proactive. Apex Labs set up a formal process for creating certified true copies of any at-risk documents like those fading logs. By making a controlled, verified copy early on, they basically gave that data a life raft, ensuring it would survive long after the original paper gave up the ghost. Okay, let's switch gears and talk about the digital world. Because as tough as preserving paper can be, Apex Labs' biggest headache, and I'm guessing yours too, was dealing with the constantly changing, fast-moving world of digital technology.
I mean, this timeline says it all, doesn't it? The storage media we use, the software we need to read it, it all becomes obsolete with terrifying speed. Think about it. A file saved to a floppy disk in '95 might as well be on another planet today. It's a technology treadmill, and it makes long-term access a huge problem.
So a set-it-and-forget-it approach was just not an option for Apex Labs. Their digital strategy had to be active. It involved a clear plan for migrating data to newer systems on a regular schedule, and crucially, they had rigorous quality control checks to make sure nothing got lost or corrupted in the move. Just as important, their IT staff was actually trained on the why, on the long-term retention rules of a regulated lab.
You can have the most secure archive in the world, physical or digital, but it's totally useless if you don't control who can get into it. It's like building a fortress and then leaving the front gate wide open. This is exactly why Apex Labs created a very specific and very important role. They appointed a formal archivist. Think of this person as the sole guardian of the archive. They are the gatekeeper, responsible for managing everything and making sure that every single time someone accessed a record, it was controlled, it was vetted, and it was documented.
And they followed a critical piece of best practice here. Their archivist had to be completely independent from the lab work itself. This is absolutely non-negotiable. It prevents any kind of conflict of interest and makes sure the person guarding the records has no personal stake in the data they're protecting.
And every single time someone touched a record, digitally or physically, it was logged in a meticulous audit trail. This log captured the who, what, when, and why for every single interaction, no exceptions. This provides that complete traceability that auditors live for.
Okay, now for the moment of truth. After all this planning, all this investment in systems and procedures, Apex Labs gets that call. The one every lab preps for, a surprise regulatory inspection. Let's see how it all paid off.
And the auditor's request was a real test. It was complicated, it spanned different types of records, some physical, some digital, for one specific subject from a trial that ended almost a decade ago. This is exactly the kind of request that can send an unprepared lab into a tailspin for days.
So what was the result at Apex Labs? A total success. Because they had this robust system, because they had planned for digital obsolescence, and because they had an independent archivist who knew exactly where everything was, they retrieved every single document, intact, complete, and legible, in just 45 minutes. That right there is the gold standard. So what's the big takeaway here? What can we all learn from the success of Apex Labs? Let's boil their whole strategy down to a few core principles that you can use to build an archive that's not just compliant, but that will truly last. It really comes down to these three pillars. Number one, security. Protecting your records from every threat, from fire and floods to bit rot. Number two, accessibility. Making sure your data is still readable decades from now, not just next year. And number three, control. Managing who gets in with an independent archivist and a perfect audit trail. So as we wrap up, just remember this. The entire legacy of your work, the very foundation for future research, it's all preserved in those records. So take these principles back to your own lab and ask yourselves honestly, is our archive truly built to last? Because the future of science is counting on it.